right. Hi, Youmna Saba, calling in from Paris, and I'm in Beirut.
Hello.
How are you? How's your day today?
Good, good. It's been good. I'm traveling tomorrow, so I've got a few preparations today.
Where are you going tomorrow?
I'm going to play in Slovenia and then in Austria, and then I come back.
Back to Paris. And you're
Yes,
playing the new album material?
yes. I'm playing solo.
So you've been on tour for this album for...
Yeah, since April, I would say I've been, yeah, just going from one place to the other, performing it. Yeah, and still till the end of the year, more dates.
And how's the reception of the album? Do you feel that the audience responds to it in a way that sort of inspired you?
For sure, I've had very good feedback actually, and I've played it in many different uh, situations. Like I've played it in big festivals. I also played it in smaller venues, different crowds, non-Arab speakers. Most of them were non-Arab speakers. Um, so like the reception was really good so far. So I'm very happy.
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful album. It's one of my favorites in a long time. It's still
Thank
so
you.
good.
Thank
Yes.
you. Wow, thank you.
So let's talk about it. Tell me about the title. Tell me about how the idea came about, and also the lyrics for each song and the
Mm.
concept, and then we'll sort of dig in together.
So it's called Wishah, and Wishah means veil in Arabic. And I wrote this album over a long period of time. So it took maybe 3 years to write, from developing actually the device for my oud that links it to electronics, which I developed here in France in Reims with Nicolas Canot. And the idea was it was a bit inspired from classical Arabic music from the beginning of the century, which in improvised settings, sometimes the musicians would mirror each other's phrases, and with, of course, with interpretations, like with each one's interpretation. So I wanted this somehow, this logic with the electronics. And so I developed a system where the electronics is always shadowing what I'm playing or what I'm singing throughout synthesized sounds, or throughout as well feedback, which is feedback from my instrument, which interacts with my voice. So it's always about these shadows of sounds that happen as I perform the song. So it's always there's the song and its shadow somehow. And this interplay between what we hear and what we don't hear and what we think we're hearing, it inspired the title actually, Wishah, which came after I wrote the album.
So it's
Um,
the echo of the sound.
yeah, it's mostly not the echo. It's mostly like what you're perceiving and what you're imagining. This interplay, and it's like wishah is also like a veil you see and you unsee, and it's also comes from the word muwashah as well. Muwashah is a derivative from wishah, which is also something that is mixed, like two different or many different colors that you see through them. So it's this seeing and unseeing and revealing and not revealing that is very key in the album. And also to me, because it was a very I didn't have a complete vision of the album as I was writing it, so I was uncovering it as I worked on it throughout throughout the past so it took from 2020 when I started working on the device, and then from that starting to compose. So 21, 22 it was all compositions, and 22 I recorded it actually. So later, after recording, etc., sending it to labels, and then releasing. So it was released last October, on the
Yes.
6th of October, 2023.
It's a lot of major events that have happened during the life of this album, the
For
revolution,
sure.
then the explosion, then
Exactly.
the
And
beginning
my
of
move
the
to Paris
genocide.
as well, and my move to Paris. So it's a lot of changes, a lot of dark, also dark events, a lot of them, and also happy discoveries and happy encounters, which I don't think there's a lot of light in the album. It's a pretty dark album, but yes, it's this. I think it really reflects that phase for me. Yeah,
Yeah, where there's a lot going on. There's literally a lot of sort of upheaval.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so it's interesting that the technology sort of came before the compositions and
Mhm.
the lyrics, did they come last?
Uh, no, usually the lyrics sometimes they come with the music exactly at the same time. I'd be improvising and I play something and then the lyrics come out. Sometimes um, sounds like the lyrics come out and then I replace them with lyrics that sounds like gibberish that I sing while playing. So yeah, the lyrics usually are the last, if you want. Like logically, to me, the lyrics come last, but sometimes they come at the same time. And sometimes it's like a sentence I wrote, I don't know, like years before that pops up again, and then I elaborate around it. Yeah.
So is it kind of a diaristic album or is it more of a conceptual album? Is it an album that really studies or explores this idea of sound?
It was based on very theoretical notions that I wanted to explore. But of course, it takes from the personal, like the personal is very present, like in most of my work. But yes, it is based on a lot of research, a lot of trial and error, a lot of yeah, a lot of thinking as well, like thinking of what I'm doing, which sometimes reveals itself later, not while working, you know. Sometimes some ideas come and spontaneously, and I think they're good without knowing why they're good, and I keep them, and then I realize later, actually, I understand what I did. So the analytical always comes later.
Yes, it's sort of an instinctive process of
Mm,
experimenting with form and sound and
exactly,
technology.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the personal aspect of the music and the lyrics, how it's connected to your own life and also to how you're feeling right now?
Uh, some so the Wishah is made of five. It's one composition. Actually, I imagined it as one composition first, and then I divided it in my mind into five, and then the division became the tracks. Also, this for practical reasons, you know, like because of Spotify, because of playlists, because of I can't just put a 30-minute track, it won't pass anywhere. So that's the divisions. Um, but these phases, I wrote them like each one was written in a different place. And I was in a specific in a specific setting at each time. Some of the tracks I wrote them when I was in Beirut. The first one I wrote it when I was in Beirut. It was really a process that came up that evolved slowly. The lyrics, like I won't go through the very personal, but it's really these very like very life-altering events that happened on a global level, on a national level. I'm talking about Lebanon, and on a personal level. So all of these combined, and maybe the inability to understand what was happening, and the only way out was through the creative work. so yes, it does reflect all of these events that were happening, and it was a dark phase. I mean, it's still kind of continuing on other levels, but it is definitely, there's a clear shift in the world and in our perception of the world, and seeing truth as it is and not hiding behind veils, and so it's kind of dropping the veil. That is my album.
That's huge. I love that. So, seeing truth, what appears to you? How are you feeling, about the world right now? What are you feeling around you in terms of movements and
I mean, it's just uh, I don't think I'm at a stage where I can formulate exactly how I'm feeling because of the intensity and the speed at which the events are happening. Like for example, the genocide in Gaza, like there's one event that shocks, for example, the bombing of the Ma'madan hospital the first month, and then trying to integrate this event and understanding it. But by the time you're doing this, a lot of bigger events are still happening, massacres one after the other. So this is still very like we are living with these massacres every day. They're happening every day, and I'm still not at in a place where I can make sense or know what I'm feeling, because it's beyond anything I've ever experienced in my life. So, um, of course, there is solidarity, and there are movements happening in the world, in different communities. Um, uh, but yeah, it's just there's also this like here I use the word dissonance. Like there's this huge dissonance between daily life. Like I'm in my apartment here, I'm safe. I go down the street, I'm safe. Um, and I can now we're talking, but we're not following the news right now. So there is this thing that's very disturbing and very I don't know how to describe it. Like these two people that are experiencing two different realities or multiple realities at the same time, and yeah, it's just weird
definitely.
to say the
Yes,
least. Yeah,
it's so much, but I think what it comes down to really is sheer violence, like raw violence,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and how hard it is to accept, to understand and sort of accept
Mm-hmm.
this level of, cruelty and destruction and violence. And I think a lot of us are stuck almost like in shock.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about this album is how quiet it is. And what you're describing is you know, so much action. There's the
Yeah.
explosion in Lebanon, which was literally incredibly
Mm,
loud.
mm,
There's the protest movements, there's your move to Paris, there's Palestine, and yet you created something incredibly slow and incredibly minimal in so many
mm,
ways. And so I was really curious about that, that need to sort of almost bring it down to the essence of like literally the
mm,
sound of the voice, the sound of the
mm,
instrument, and the sound of the manipulation.
mm. Exactly. It's very like um, mm, uh, introverted album, if you want. I don't
Introspective.
introspective, yes.
Uh,
No, but also introvert, because
Also,
it's
yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
it's really an album that focuses on the very small, and I think it's a way of coping as well. When so much is happening around you, you just focus on what you have in front of you, on your breathing, on any sound that comes out of the body or the instrument, or and it's kind of that somehow, it's just bringing this focus to something. on like focusing on one thing. Yeah, I think.
And how about, so you talked about the voice and you talked about the sound of
Mm.
the oud. And
Mm.
how about, what do you think happens when you modify, digitally modify the sound?
Mm.
Is that a form of disturbance as well, or not necessarily to you?
Not necessarily, because I never actually, all the electronic sounds are generated by the laptop and are not a distortion of the acoustic sound. Maybe at one instance there is a distortion of the acoustic sound, but it, like, you don't hear the acoustic sound anymore. You're just in the distortion. Um, and actually, I use the acoustic sound as a trigger, as the main trigger of these electronic sounds. But it was never actually a distortion of the acoustic sound. So I see them as another layer, not as a yeah. Because also I think, like, with the oud, there are so many sounds that I wasn't paying attention to, and this is kind of a way to highlight these sounds that I found uh, that I hear when you're just hugging the oud very closely and you're just playing to yourself in a very quiet environment.
So
So yeah.
it's really embodied. It has this really sensual, sort of sensorial aspect where you're amplifying the
Yeah.
actual acoustics and the actual touch, which is, it's incredible because you're bringing us back to your humanity as a musician in this inhumane, dehumanized
Yeah.
sort of soundscape that we're
Yeah.
in right now,
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's really going back to the main focus, and even when I perform it on stage, I'm alone. Sometimes the stage is huge and I'm in the center alone and just doing this and just doing repetitive motifs, and yeah, there is something of that in the work. But all of these points were not, like, now we're discussing them because I have distance from the album, but it was never like a way to, yes, I want to do this because um, like, now I would say maybe it was actually a coping mechanism of bringing back the focus to myself. But maybe at that time I had no idea. I just thought that, oh, the sound is cool. How can I integrate it? Yeah.
Definitely. And it's interesting that this happened as you were moving from east to west. And of course, these are
Mm.
colonial
Yeah.
geographies,
Mm.
but you moved from, the Arab world, from Arabic culture, which you were immersed in because
Mm.
you studied it.
Mm.
You studied art and poetry and music, of course, and then you moved to Paris. And so, what happened to that tradition when you moved? Did your sort of perspective change, or do you feel that the reception
Mm.
changed when you moved as well?
Actually, I moved for very specific reasons. I moved not because I couldn't stand living in Lebanon. Uh, and this is something, it's a promise I made myself a long time ago. And I'm like, if I ever would move from Lebanon, it's not because I was forced to leave. I would move because I have a valid reason to move. And actually, I moved when I got a residency, an artist residency at Cité des Arts here. And I got this opportunity to work on the device on my instrument. And because in France, there's a very big electronic music culture and electroacoustic culture. And I had zero knowledge of that. But it fascinated me for the simple reason that digitally and electronically, not only digitally, also like in any electronic synthesizer, we can create any sound we want. Like, this was the premise of everything. Like, I can create any sound I want. I want to create sounds that would accompany my acoustic sound and my voice. And this is why I came here, to really get this experience and immerse myself in this as much as possible. And so far, it's been a very steep learning curve, and I'm very grateful for it, because I learned so much. And just by going and listening, like watching concerts and listening to other musicians, what they do, and see the tools and everything, it's really very inspiring. But just to go to the question of how it's received, of course, there are layers that are not don't go through to the audience. Already the language thing, yeah, I sing in Arabic. Of course, the impressions are there, are communicated, like people can feel kind of what the general feeling of the album is, or what I'm singing about, kind of. They feel like, once in Spain, after a concert, a woman came, she only speaks Catalan, and she showed me a picture, and she's like, I don't speak English, but your music made me think of a certain image. And she showed me the picture of a sea with dead fish in it. And I'm like, this is exactly it, you know? She got it, but she got the theme of the sea, of water, of death, of disaster, of she got it, and she didn't understand a word. And anyway, my lyrics are never very clear. They're in also the tradition, like the tradition of using metaphors, as we do in Arabic. So so yes, there's this layer of language that is not always that doesn't come across. I don't know what the verb is, but also yes, as we were saying before off air, how it's sometimes my instrument and my voice, you know, like the oud. There's a certain expectation of what people know of that instrument, and sometimes they hear something completely different, and they're shocked, and they try to bring it always actually in descriptions. Sometimes I had to say, no, this is not it, because they always bring it to tradition and traditional music and folk music. But if the instrument is used and has existed for ages now, it doesn't mean that it's still used in a traditional way, and it doesn't mean that when we see it, we're going to hear something traditional, or whatever I'm doing is breaking away from a tradition. No, it's just doing something else, but using this instrument. So you don't have these questions with the guitar, for example.
Exactly. It's such a Eurocentric idea
Mm,
of classical music and also of experimentation, because
mm,
there was always experimentation in the in our, in regional musical traditions
exactly.
and
Exactly.
poetic traditions as well. You talked about the metaphor,
Mm,
and you talked about improvisation. So
mm.
experimentation is deeply rooted in our regional, and we have our own regional classical musical forms. And so Europeans don't necessarily realize that classical music is not just European, right? That
Yeah, yeah.
there are various
Mm,
repertoires.
exactly. Exactly. For sure.
So what is the dissonance there that you feel between, the repertoire of Western classical music and the repertoire you studied really deeply, because you have a master's in
Mm.
ethnomusicology. So the
Uh,
regional repertoire, maqamat and the whole,
yeah.
and oud and
It's a completely different musical system based on completely different, it's very different. It's a different way of expression, you know, like and I studied the musicology, like it's not called ethnomusicology where I studied, it's called musicology of traditions, general musicology of traditions. This is what it's called. It's also like a title that's questionable as well. But the question of what the difference is, it's so big, like so many differences. I can start and maybe never finish. For example, in the Western classical music, the intervals between one note and the other are calculated and are strict. You don't move. Yeah, in Arabic in Arabic music, we have so many different traditions, and only, for example, if we take Egypt on its own, we find the same difference between the interval between two notes varying from one tradition to the other. This is only in Egypt, yeah, between for example, the Zar tradition or the tradition of the Mashayikh or the tradition of, so so nothing is rigid, nothing is fixed, calculated. Um, we don't have classifications. Improvisation was a major asset, but then it disappeared. All of these disappeared actually slowly from the region, from the music in the region. And when I say the region, I'm talking about the Mashriq al-Arabi, because I don't know the exact, I don't know what's in the Maghrib. I'm not very familiar with Maghrib music. But Mashriq is Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria. Yeah, this region. In the 30s, there was a congress in Cairo, an ethnomusicology congress, and a lot of ethnomusicologists came from the West to study Arabic music, like to study and analyze Arabic music, and they were just listening to different groups and different performers and musicians and interpreters, and trying to calculate the intervals, to put rigid rules. And actually they couldn't, but they found a system that's mathematical, but that's a bit, that kind of also round the corners and removes nuances. They introduced also around that time the conservatoire, conservatories. So teaching moved from being like a teacher to disciple to being in a class, with a manhaj. I don't know what manhaj is in English. With a with a clear method of teaching. Before that, it was like just the student would live actually with their teacher, and they would learn from them everything, not only how to play the instrument or how to sing. They also introduced notation, like the general notation system that we use everywhere. So all of these things, when you have a clear notation of a certain piece, you stop improvising. Also, introduction of orchestras as well. So when you have orchestras, you have, I don't know, 50 musicians, 70 musicians or more. You're not going to improvise because then it will be chaotic. But when you have an ensemble of 4 musicians, then you can improvise actually. And this was the base, this was the core of music in that region. It was based on on interpretations. And it's not just interpretation like whichever way we feel it, we do. No, it was within a certain system that was not defined as such, but that was passed on from generation to the other. So it's also an oral tradition. So all of these things make the musical system very different, and also the function of the music, like in which context we're hearing it. Is it, for example, orchestras were mostly, they would be endorsed by different by states, yeah, and it's more a nationalistic pride, and but there in our region, it's not. It's entertainment. It's more entertainment. I'm talking more about the in context of not religious or spiritual context. I'm talking more of secular music. It was more for entertainment. It would take maybe hours, 4 hours, 5 hours playing one concert, and people would interact. They would you have the Raddida, you have the people who would say Allah after when they, you know, and all of these, it's just different. It's different, and we cannot even making a comparison is not possible because it's very different. The notion of time, the notion of duration is very different. How we perceive slowness versus speed, how we perceive how many notes per second, if we want to calculate it that way, how the notion of silence, all of these things are completely different. It's a different culturally it's different, and of course I'm talking historically. Yes, I'm not talking now, because now there's much more exchange and much more so these notions are much more blurred. They're not as clear.
Yes, and there were always exchanges between these traditions, but maybe the Western tradition doesn't recognize our contribution as much, right? And that's part of the work of decolonization, is to show the connections between all these instruments and movements and evolutions of different musical and poetic traditions that show up in sort of contemporary mainstream music, but isn't necessarily attributed to other regions.
Yeah. And especially now, like there's a lot of borrowing from different cultures, which is fine. But yeah, I mean, there should be more clarity about that, like more clarity and more crediting and yeah.
Definitely. And I feel that that's why we're all kind of studying regional culture, because we weren't necessarily taught all the time our own history and culture, and also because it helps us understand, how we feel in the world and where our language, some of our, rituals come from. Sort of, for me, I love the idea of the ghazal, the love song, the love language. And it's so strong in regional traditions. And of course, it's not very present in the West, it's so different. So to try to sort of reconnect with these various, and the spiritual tradition as well, the idea of the ecstatic traditions, for example, of Sufism and so on. So I was wondering about your attachment, your connection to the oud and to the voice in terms of studying regional cultures.
Yeah, I mean, I started playing oud while doing my musicology studies, which is I was 27 when I started playing the oud, and the reason why I picked this instrument is simply to understand, because I was studying music from a theoretical point of view, and I wanted to understand it from a practical point of view, and to listen to the maqamat and to hear things and this music that I decided to study and learn, I actually never performed it. Like I performed it within the context of my university, because I was asked to, in exams and but I never performed it because I feel that I arrived a bit too late to the game. And it's something that really needs to be you really need to be embedded in it because of that improvisation aspect. Because improvisation is like language. You learn it, you have to, like when we talk, we're improvising. So if we're not comfortable with the language, we cannot improvise. We just repeat phrases that we learned on Duolingo, for example. So I felt that I couldn't actually learn this quickly, this language, and be very fluent in it. And I didn't want to do like I felt it was also borrowing and using it in I don't know. No, it's not a true way of performing, and I didn't want that. So but the way it, of course, I studied this because I wanted to learn about our region. I wanted to understand what was beyond Fairuz, because my musical knowledge was Fairuz and the Rahbani school, and that's it. I don't know what was before that, what was before Kulthum. I had no idea. And I had these questions in my mind, and I thought that doing this program, this musicology program, would give me some answers, and it did. It was great. But the way this tradition or these traditions actually inspired me were more on a compositional level. So I would borrow ideas or concepts or things I would notice in someone's voice, while listening to a certain recording. I'd say, this is very nice. I'm not going to repeat it or to copy it but this inspires another idea, and I let my creative process do the rest. With the voice, it's different. This is without, but with the voice, it's different because I always loved singing from a very, very young age. Like I would sing everywhere, and to the extent that I wouldn't stop. This was the joke of my parents, that I would never stop singing, and until it became annoying. So I have a very strong attachment to the voice, and it fascinates me because I can also recognize people's voices, singers' voices, very, very easily. Like if I listen once to a recording and I listen again to that same singer somewhere else, I can recognize the voice immediately. So there is this fascination with the voice, which I wrote about in a text about the voice. I was asked to write a text for Spectre, which is a magazine by the GRM group in Paris. So also singing in the tradition of the موسيقى المشرقية was also not possible with the aesthetic of my voice. I was trained differently. I used to sing Mariah Carey in the shower, for example. So all of these influences shaped my voice differently and shaped the use of my voice differently. So I actually, it's an ongoing search for what my voice can say and how. For example, when I started writing my own songs, my voice was much higher, was in the higher ranges. Now I sing very low, and this shift happened gradually, and I noticed that aesthetically, this is what I'm most comfortable with, and this is more what I relate to, etc., etc. So yeah, this is for the voice, and yeah, I mean, vocal tradition is very, very present in our culture, and even like we take it for granted, but when you hear the adhan in the mosques, like there is music in this. Yeah.
انقطعت الكهرباء. خلينا نرجع نحكي عن الأذان لأنه I really wanted to ask you about that.
Okay.
I really felt that there was a strong presence there of that, again, that pure voice, the call to prayer, the call to meditate. So I would love to hear more, and why you chose
yeah,
why you chose to sing in Arabic.
Okay. Yeah, so I was talking about the how and I made this comment maybe 5-6 years ago when I was sitting with some friends on a balcony, and there was not adhan, it was tawshih from the mosque next to my friend's house, and I was saying that it's crazy how much music we have, like traditionally in this city and in other cities in Lebanon and around. Like it's out there, like the city becomes a place for these vocal and musical occurrences, and it's beautiful because if we after a while we stop hearing it because we get used to it and we stop hearing it, but it's really like it's a musical phenomenon continuously in 5 times a day, you know, in the city, and it's great. Yeah, you wanted to ask, sorry.
Yes, about the, why you chose to sing in Arabic and this connection to the call to prayer, the call to meditation, and the importance of the voice in spiritual tradition.
I mean, I didn't choose to sing in Arabic, it came naturally, and I never fought it, and I don't compromise this because it's the way I express myself, and that's it, you know. And also, this kind of dictates the use of the voice, which is not like if you give me an English text, I cannot sing it the way I sing. It's very different, and the words in Arabic, they somehow dictate also the melodic line, which is the case in Adhan, for example, or in any other religious recitation, such as the Quranic recitation or the Bible recitation, or like the Byzantine in the Byzantine tradition, for example. So the musical because also like these recitations are usually improvised, and it's the word that dictates the melodic choices. Because you have the Arabic word, because you have very strict and rigid rules of how to pronounce and where to stop, where to go, where to breathe, etc. So yeah, my choice of singing was in Arabic was never an actual choice. It just happened, and yeah, the voice, and I think there's something about the voice that is um, different from any instrument. I feel that it connects immediately with the person listening, with the listeners, and which is not always the case with an instrument. And because I think a voice does not lie in any way, like you can tell from the voice whether it's being truthful or not. Um, so yeah, that's the voice.
It's so interesting. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but a lot of the research I'm doing points me to this idea of screaming, of the scream. There's a very famous music theorist whose name is Fred Moten, who writes about free jazz.
Yeah.
And he wrote that the scream was, a response to the torture of, a woman from her, her slave owner. And this scream translated into free jazz, into jazz as a music of, resistance and liberation. And the scream is also, the syncopation, the rupture, the cut, and the experimentation. And a lot of the texts I'm reading are now, coming back to this idea of screaming. And the person who inspired this whole project was Etel Adnan and the Arab apocalypse, and the idea that she literally like screaming through the whole poem, right? And she's saying stop, like stop, all caps, and the visual language of rage and madness as well that accompanies the text. And it's like calligraphy, but it's also like almost like musical notes. And so this idea of the woman's scream is sort of, weaving through this project. And in your case, it's really not so much a scream as it is a whisper. But I'm wondering if there's this idea of something really visceral.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot detach the voice from anything visceral, yeah. And I wasn't trained as a vocalist, so I don't have these rules of how to use the voice or how to like, for example, opera singers. There are ways and techniques to use the voice to hit certain notes, etc., etc. And yeah, and so I never screamed in my music till now, but also sometimes as you said, like a scream is not only a sonic boom. Yeah, it could be just a disruption of any other, or it could be a complete silence, and silence sometimes the absence of a voice is a scream, or the absence of movement in a certain music is a scream, uh, because it disrupts our expectation of what we're hearing. Yeah, so I think I don't know, I'm thinking out loud here.
Yeah, that's the disorientation, right? It's the disorientation, the queer disorientation that we were talking about earlier. The idea that destabilizing your sort of the world as it is, as your sensorial system is accustomed to experiencing it, and suddenly you're sort of, as you said, disrupting this sort of comfort zone, and then
yeah.
and then what happens, and what also I'm really interested in, what happens in the unspoken, because sometimes language fails to describe the horrors that we are witnessing. And right now we're witnessing such a total horror, apocalypse, ecocide, genocide. I mean, so many tragedies and collapses around us. And then, what happens when language fails to sort of, when we fail to speak, when we literally are muted by this shock,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not everything is expressed, like even in the Arab apocalypse of Ital Adnan, like the small doodles she has is when actually her language failed to express what it wanted to express. And yeah, since 4 years now, it's very difficult for me, it's very difficult to write. Like, what do you write about? What do you sing about? What do you how do you like already to pick up the instrument in such um, when all of these atrocities are happening, like it's just it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort to and also there's the questioning of what are we doing, like what exactly are we doing? We're sitting here, we're playing music and festivals, and what does all of this mean when there's this many people dying every day and we can't do anything about it? Like, I don't know. And this is what I was talking at the beginning, what I was saying at the beginning about these multiple realities that we're living, and it's just in between them there are huge gaps, and these gaps it's this is the scream to me, because these gaps, like, what do you do with these gaps? And they're not reconcilable in any way, they're not bridgeable in any way. And yeah, to me there are no tools or no words or expressions or to express what's there now. Maybe later there will be, but now it's just no way. Yeah.
And do you feel that, we were talking about institutions, and you had an incredible installation at the Quai Branly, which maybe we could talk about some other time, where you literally infiltrated the space of a very colonial institution, very colonial museum, and sort of dug out from their archives, obsolete instruments that aren't being used anymore, and brought them to life through your own sort of experimentation, and sort of allowed them to echo the space itself, which is really powerful. And I remember when you talked about this, I asked you, whether you felt that this action had, disrupted, the colonial dynamics of the museum, whether you were able, in fact, to infiltrate the entire system that supports such spaces and audiences. And your response was really interesting. So maybe you can, and Camilla Gibran also sang at your event. So perhaps you could tell me a little more now about how you felt this project sort of was able to change, the dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I think the importance of this question, this project was that it raised so many questions, and these questions were raised openly in meetings with visitors, etc., that the museum organized. So, so this was very. To me, this was the main aim of this work, just to raise questions like. Why are these instruments here? Why are they not played? Why? And some of the questions I have answers for, but not all of them. Why aren't we allowed inside? Like, and I created this sound bank from the resonances of the instruments, from the sounds of resonances of the instruments. And my biggest victory to me was that the sound bank is now under a Creative Commons license, and this was something that the museum, up to my knowledge, has never done. Put any of their collection in the under a Creative Commons license. And this took a long discussion and fights and to be able to put this. And it might be a tiny move, but it's to me it meant everything, because it's liberating something actually from these collections, and it's liberating the thing that is still very alive, and this is the sonic phenomena that's continuously happening in these objects that were designed specifically to produce sound, and and this was to me a way to actually yeah, to 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 go against the rigid boundaries that museums put between objects and people, and also to re-question all the interpretations that the museum usually put or impose on objects. Okay, based on studies and based on scientific studies and, but you're telling stories that don't necessarily are the stories of the object. And my installation was a way to let the object speak for itself, to give the sound it wants on its own, and then to take all of these, collect them, and give them to anyone who would like to use them. Yeah.
Yes, so maybe we can end for today by talking about how this uh, uh, connects to your idea of solidarity that you mentioned earlier, because it seems that there's this movement to return artifacts, right? There is a movement to sort of decolonize museums at so many levels in terms of the donors, the financial systems that support museums, in terms of how the staff is being treated, unionizing, even recognizing in certain areas of the world, the lands that the museums are on, the workers who built the museums, right, the labor rights, and definitely, as you said, the ways in which collections are narrated, curated, and returning objects to their. In Lebanon, there's so many objects have been stolen, archaeological objects, and there's a movement now to return them and sort of, really monitor the care of these artifacts. And I feel that your work is sort of part of this conversation. Even though you're solo, you're really part of this whole network and dialogue of experimental musicians from the region that I know you're friends with, and partner with, whether, it's Camellia or, Fadi Tabbal or, Tijal, or all these networks in the diaspora, networks in resistance movements, whether it's Palestine or Beirut or other areas, and then your music becomes almost like a voice of resistance or revolution, even though it's not typical revolutionary music like traditional like resistance songs, right? I don't know. This is like I just like had this feeling that it was like almost like echoing, this whole unrest,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, solidarity is very important, and I don't see myself, as you said, I'm a solo musician now because I'm working on a solo project, but it's not a project that just exists in a void. It comes like I grew up with in Beirut. I developed my musical knowledge and practice and musicological practice in Lebanon, along friends and collaborators, and it's not a phase that I put aside, and I don't wish to see any collaboration as just, sometimes it is just a one-off, but longer collaborations are meant to just grow with you, even if you don't collaborate directly, but you remain friends with the people you collaborate. And there's this exchange and support and then inspiration. So I think we all take and give from each other all the time, and this is very, very key to any like I don't see myself out of the Beirut scene, for example, although physically I am out and I haven't played in Beirut for a very long time. But I still consider myself part of the scene, because of all the connections I still have, of all the exchanges um, and also on like it's I think in existing at this point, unfortunately, but existing is resistance in this at this point, like existing also my music existing under this format is resistance, regardless if it sounds like protest music. It's not, but it's um, like all of the small fights and bigger fights that we have to fight on a daily basis with all the systems that really govern us. This is resistance, and we cannot resist alone. So we all resist together, I hope, because otherwise we cease to exist, and we have to blend into what's existing and accept what's there and just be part of it and not have our voices heard. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Youmna. It was such a pleasure. It's our first
Thank you.
conversation, and I hope there will be many more. And have a great tour, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you,
Inshallah.
Shireen. Thank
Yalla,
you.
bawsit.
Bye.
Bye.